Hey guys and gals, welcome to the second episode of Back to the Basics, the show where I try and find interesting EDH cards from old sets. Before we begin, I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's been liking, commenting, and subscribing to my videos, as well as those of you who have been using my Puka Trade link. It's incredible that you've all enjoyed my little videos, and it's a genuine pleasure to keep making these funny little moving picture things. Anyway, in this episode we'll be looking at the second expansion for Magic the Gathering, Antiquities. The story of Antiquities follows Urza and Mishra, two brothers who would eventually go to war, and the devastation that they caused to their plane that they called home. It was the first expansion to feature a storyline exclusively made for the game, which isn't hard if you think about it. Designed by Richard Garfield and the team of students who helped him with the initial game, Antiquities would introduce a heavily artifact-themed set to the world of Magic. Antiquities is notable for the introduction of the first manland, Mishra's Factory, as well as several prototypes of cards that would eventually become equipment artifacts. It would give birth to one of the most expensive lands ever printed, Mishra's Workshop. You may have also noticed that there was a cool prefix on most of the artifacts. Depending on what the artifact did, it could be called a mono artifact, which meant once per turn, a poly artifact that could be used more than once if paid for the proper cost, and a continuous artifact, which meant it happened continuously. Pretty cool, huh? Now let's get to my picks. The first card we're going to look at is the Argivian Archaeologist. The ability to return cards from your graveyard to hand are often quite strong. Although more narrow than Regrowth, the ability to reuse this ability far outweighs its limited usages. Furthermore, you can bring back anything with the artifact's prefix, so creatures, lands, and the Theros legendary weapons can also be among those targeted. He might not be your first choice to return artifacts to your hand, but his cost is pretty decent and his ability doesn't cost too much. Armageddon Clock is a win condition if I've ever seen one. I could see this being put in a Zedger deck, since you'll be gaining so much life on your upkeep that it'll offset the life lost from the clock, but your opponents won't have that benefit. Frankly, it's a pretty fair win condition anyway, since the opponents always have a chance to remove counters from it at the beginning of their upkeep. Energy Flux is a card that I would love to build around. I would love to stick in an Esper Stacks deck one day, and just run every enchantment, creature, and artifact to make the game installed for as long as I possibly could. This would also be one of the perfect cards to run if you were having trouble with Daretti. Gate to Phyrexia is probably one of the only instances in the game where black aggressively interacts with artifacts. It has a lot of stipulations, but if you need the artifact hate in mono black, this is certainly something to consider. Ivory Tower is a great card to run if you intend on having an enormous hand. I found it does some decent work at offsetting the life loss I have when I play my Erebos EDH deck. It has very narrow application, as you really need to have a hand size of greater than 4 always to get any kind of value out of it. The Sage of Latinam is another blue card that has an interesting interaction with artifacts. It makes me think of an early rendition of Arkham Dagsum since it kills its own artifacts for effects. While not as good, having the ability to save an artifact by sacrificing it and drawing a card is pretty decent. Before we move on, I want to draw your attention to the wording of this card. Look at it. It's freaking huge! I'm so glad they streamlined a lot of these effects so that we don't have to read a book worth of stuff to be able to figure out how to sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. Titania's Song is an interesting way in green to shut down troublesome artifacts. It'll prevent a lot of the degenerate combos we see in EDH with artifacts, but it's kind of strange considering that green has so much instant speed, artifact and enchantment removal to run this. It would be pretty cool to fight Avenger of Zendikar with their Basalt Monolith though. The Urza's lands are staple to modern Tron decks, but I found that they can be a bit lacking when it comes to EDH. Often it can be much harder to find these 3 specific lands without tutoring for them, and since we are not running multiples, the likelihood of drawing them is that much lower. I can see people running these in mono brown decks like Karn or Kozilek, but with the new printing of the Waste's basic land type in Oath of Gatewatch, I can see a lot of lands that were once required for these decks becoming less played in EDH. Well gang, those were my picks for Antiquities. Be sure to let me know in the comments of any other hidden gems you might have found in Antiquities. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate all the support and feedback you guys have been giving me, so as always, thank you for watching, and please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe.